you very much. I know it's really important for us to understand that there's a lot of information out there. The creation of uncertainty and confusion has been a very effective strategy, and I think those days are over. And one of the reasons I say that, I'm going to bring up now the policy panel with Mr. Frank Clegg. Frank, please join us on the stage. Frank is the former president of Microsoft of Canada. And he comes here to talk to us about why we need to undertake precautionary action. Renee Sharp has been a leader working with the Environmental Working Group, and we have worked as well on the same issues involving cell phone safety with the city, and the city has, as I showed you, issued its own statement recently. Sushma Bhatia. Sushma is a whirlwind with the city's Department of the Environment. And we don't have time for all of the slides that you shared with me, but I'm going to put up some that I think you can go through rather quickly because it's very important for people to understand. San Francisco passed a law, the Cell Phone Right to Know Ordinance. It is still the law. How many of you have ever heard of it? How many of you thought the law had been struck down? Well, it hasn't been. They have been limited in what they can do, and we're going to hear from Sushma about that first, and then we'll have a policy discussion. I want to ask Brett. Brett, do you want to be from the floor with a microphone, or do you want to come up here to join us? All right, please. Yes, Brett Bocook is living the consequences of the failure to warn people about cell phone radiation. Like others in this room, he was an early adopter of a cell phone, and he is battling brain cancer, something he developed as a very young man. And I've asked him to join in the discussion because he's, in addition to being a brain cancer survivor, he's an attorney. And so he understands some of the legal issues that are involved here as well. So while Brett is making his way up, Sushma, why don't you start with some of your slides here, and we very much appreciate your taking time from your schedule to join us.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sushma Bhatia with the San Francisco Department of Environment, and today I'm here to share the story of what we in San Francisco tried to do in response to all the science you've heard about and the health impacts that can be caused by exposure to cell phone radio frequency energy. I want to start by setting the context for why we decided to take action. Back in 2003, San Francisco became the very first city in the nation to adopt the Precautionary Principle. How many of you here have heard about it? The Precautionary Principle. Okay. So for those of you that are not familiar with it, the language is up on the slide. But essentially, the Precautionary Principle mandates that we, the city of San Francisco, take action to protect the public and the environment, even when full scientific certainty in terms of cause and effect has not been established. So I repeat, we are mandated to take action in terms of outreach, in terms of policies and programs, even when full scientific certainty has not been established. So when we became aware of the cell phone radio frequency related health impacts, this was in late 2000s. I'm not going to run through the whole list of health impacts because you've heard about them already. The city of San Francisco became really concerned about what does this mean for us? How do we inform the public about what this means for them and how they can reduce their exposure? We started looking into the issue, and we learned some of the things that you've learned about, the fact that our exposure to radio frequency energy from cell phones is much higher than other developing nations because we just tend to use our cell phones for longer periods during the day. And we're using cell phones at a younger and younger age, which means our lifetime exposure tends to be much greater. So we adopted in 2010, I'm sorry, the slides are cut off a little bit, but in 2010, the city passed the Cell Phone Right to Know Ordinance. And the main goal of this ordinance was to increase public awareness about this SAR value, or the specific absorption rate value that every phone has. How many of you are aware of what an SAR value is? Okay, so most of you are aware that every cell phone has what we call a specific absorption rate number. And all we were trying to do with the ordinance is we said, there's some scientific uncertainty about this. We're starting to see increased evidence of health impacts. Let's allow the public to make a decision on what phones they want to purchase and how they want to use the phones. So this ordinance under Mayor Gavin Newsom's leadership was adopted and passed in 2010. And this was based on FCC's own recommendation. In their fact sheets, in their websites, they had materials that talked about buying wireless devices with a lower specific absorption rate. Again, this was back in 2010. It was also based on this model in Switzerland where Swiss Telecom started to just voluntarily include this SAR values of phones in cell phone retail locations against on the collateral against new phones. So at the point of purchase, they voluntarily were including information. We said, what a great model. Let's try to replicate that in San Francisco. Once the ordinance was passed, we were going through our regulatory process, which essentially is a very public process. We hold public hearings. We were talking about what kinds of information do we want to give out to the public? What should the materials look like? How should this value be displayed? So we're having these public regulations or public hearings after the ordinance was passed. And during that time, FCC had changed their recommendations on their website and in their collateral. And you can see the language that they now have on their website, which says that the FCC does not endorse the need for these practices. Practices meaning outreach on SAR values. So during this time, we also started to understand more about how this SAR value is computed. And we started to also realize that SAR values can be a little bit confusing for the average consumer. First of all, there's limits on SAR values for the body versus the head, depending on where the phone is placed. And the SAR values really are just a maximum allowable exposure number. If you and I are using our phones, we use our phones differently, right? We all live in different places. We have different proximity to cell phone towers. Our exposure or SAR values differ greatly based on how we use our phones. So it's really not a very good comparison tool. So as we started to learn more information about how SAR values are established, we realized that this can be actually more confusing to consumers. The last thing we wanted to have happen is consumers to invest in these lower SAR phones and just use them for greater periods of time because they suddenly felt that they were safer from using these better or safer phones. So we, under the leadership of Supervisor Avalos, amended the ordinance, and we said, let's just not require the SAR values to be displayed. Instead, we'll just do outreach, because what we can all agree on is that cell phones can be used safely, and we just want to tell our residents how to use cell phones safely, maybe wearing headsets or keeping distance between the phone and the body. So it's information like this that was really important to get out, which is why we amended the ordinance in 2011, and we required that retailers, so all San Francisco retailers that sold cell phones, we required that they display a poster and some warning stickers on their collateral, and hand out fact sheets with tips. So if any resident that bought a phone or that was interested in information could walk into a retail location and ask for this information, and they would get it for free. So these are examples of collateral we created through a very public process. So our posters and our fact sheets, they're all available on our website if you're interested, so I won't go over them. But CTIA, the wireless industry, sued San Francisco and in federal court, claiming that we were in violation of the First Amendment rights of the retailers because we were requiring the retailers to give out a message that was that they disagreed with. And the CTIA also made the argument that we were preempted by federal law, by FCC. This argument was heard by the Superior Court, and ultimately, this is what you have here is an image of Judge Alsop. He ultimately reviewed all this and agreed in most part with San Francisco that we were not in violation of the First Amendment rights if we simply asked retailers to hand out fact sheets with information. And if the fact sheets clearly had our logo, it was not in any violation. He did disallow the posters and the stickers. But unfortunately, the story didn't end there. This the CTIA appealed with the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and a 3-judge panel reviewed this emergency motion made by CTIA. And this Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals actually sided with CTIA and ultimately said that San Francisco may be in violation of the First Amendment rights. In order for us to require information to be given out, the information had to be purely factual and uncontroversial. And they stated in their unpublished ruling that the material simply had our opinion and not a scientifically agreed upon opinion. So this, unfortunately, is where we had to, because we lost this appeals process, we are no longer able to enforce this law, which our supervisors, elected officials had passed in San Francisco. So instead, we had to change tactics, and this is essentially what we're doing. We're doing outreach using our own resources. We have this Healthy Home Actions campaign where we talk to residents during events, through our website, through our social media campaign about how they can take steps to reduce their radio frequency energy exposure. If you very quickly look at some of the other models that local governments or international governments have used, we like to look at France because they've made some amazing progress. They adopted legislation that requires that SAR values be posted when at the point of sale. They require that cell phones be sold with headsets, which is also great. And most importantly, they actually ban any advertising to children on cell phones. So that's an example of an ad at the city of Lyon. I think that's how you say it. Lyon, sorry. And there are other efforts that have been tried both at local government levels and state level and the international level. Essentially, they boil down to outreach, to using our own government resources, websites, outreach campaigns to get the word out. Some government agencies have issued stronger recommendations on ways to reduce children's exposure or the need to reduce exposure from cell phone radio frequency energy to children specifically. And then New Mexico has some legislation that talks about let's have more hearings, let's do more science, and think about what's the best policy approach. So those are the two ranges of actions that have been taken, and there's many other examples that fall in between. So with that, I will hand it back to Deborah.
Thank you.